Hey everybody, I just wanted to continue on another edition of Design to Heal. And so what we were talking about the other day was about how the generational trauma affects our sense of belief in how we see ourselves in the world based upon our upbringing from parents, very often who are affected by a great deal of violence or even war. And I did, just been reflecting on this, and I think that it is so common, right? When in our generation, in our time, we had so much great violence during the Cold War, right? In Africa, in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia. And we are now in the midst of another Cold War, right? And this Cold War is also turning very violent. And we're seeing this being played out in the Near East, in Lebanon, Syria, throughout Israel, and into Africa, and into Ukraine, right? And so here I am sitting in Spain, and I am now working with several people who are Ukrainian refugees or Russian refugees who are trying to escape Russia and Putin's crazy regime, and people from the Middle East, from Africa, quite a few people from Africa in Barcelona right now. And so these people, I am increasingly becoming aware, are dealing with this generational trauma. And and even in Spain, I've just been finishing up a book on the Spanish Civil War. We don't realize, right, in Spain, which is a progressive center-left government for several decades, and which is a very peaceful society where guns are completely outlawed. It's impossible to get a gun, where there's generally a great deal of peace in the country. Was torn apart by a violent civil war and a right-wing government aftermath that was truly brutal, where tens of thousands of people were disappeared or murdered because of their political beliefs. And so anybody who's in their 30s, 40s right now, obviously grew up with parents who lived through that. Even people in their 20s would have parents now who lived through the Civil War and the aftermath of Franco's regime up until 1975, right? And so we so often dismiss this in understanding where people are coming from and what happens to young individuals who are very impressionable and whose really only source of a moral compass comes from parents who were deeply affected by brutality, violence, murder, and killing. And so I've just been struck by this because, I had mentioned that I am the youngest of 10, and so my mother had me when she was 45, and so what that means is, my mother would be 110 years old right now, if she were still alive, and so that means that obviously they were turning 18 years old in 1942, right when the global war was at its peak, and they both were sent over to Asia, and that's where they met in India. My dad was in the American Army, my mom was in the British Army. And they were both there until 1947, and my mom was in Singapore dealing with, as a nurse, with POWs. My father was working for an adjutant general in some of the areas um, of military tribunal activity, war crimes, and illegal activity by American soldiers, and that's what his discharge papers had indicated. And so he must have been seeing terrible things, right? And so I grew up in the shadow of World War II, and that shadow demanded basically that people carry over what they learned in the military to the way they brought up families in the 50s and 60s and 70s, which was berating people. In the military, you berate people until you get proper behavior. And in more modern lingo, that can be thought of as learned helplessness, right? We will beat you into submission until you understand that the only way to get through this situation, this dilemma, this requirement, this military obligation is through, direct obedience. And we don't want you to think. We don't want you to be empowered. We want you to be essentially helpless in the face of berating and direct orders. And so, I grew up with a lot of yes or no. And look, this is not necessarily very different from the way a lot of people are being brought up now, because a lot of, mothers and fathers, even single mothers, right, who had to escape war-torn areas, had to sort of lay down the law with their kids in order to keep the unit going in the face of immense uncertainty, economic uncertainty, physical uncertainty, and necessity. And so, this is the way that we are often thinking about when I'm dealing with in EMDR with adults, 20s, 30s, 40s, and the belief systems that are exposed in gentle and loving and secure and careful environments to integrate physical memories of this happened to me. I was wearing this, the other person was doing this to me, and whether it was an assailant, a rapist, a mother or a father during dinner, or a sister or a brother in a screaming match, or even a teacher or a coach, right, that was being abusive. We need to take things into perspective. We need to look at the context. And again, this is not in any way, shape, or form designed to let people off the hook, to excuse behavior, to say, well, didn't I have a role in this? Didn't I have a part to play? Wasn't it my fault? Rubbish, right? That's nonsense, right? We don't have to be the victim, and we don't have to excuse the perpetrator, right? That's not the point of any of this, right? Bad things happen, but putting things in perspective is an awfully effective way to gain a sense of pity versus compassion. And again, I'm just struck by the way in which even people I work with in their 30s and 40s in all kinds of circumstances will want to dismiss the effect that Franco's regime had on people when they were growing up, right? Gay kids, for instance, right? In Franco's regime, a lot of gay people, homosexuals, were imprisoned or put to death, and so there was an astounding fear of being associated with gays, because that could get you put in prison, right? And so parents have a reflexive dislike for that, and yes, we've come a long way in Spain, of course, right? But I still see this affecting people who are in their 30s and 40s. Same thing in South America, where there is a much more, a bit more of a macho, a more masculine culture, which is a little bit less tolerant of the gay issue. And we certainly see this in the Middle East, where it's very much intolerated, and I think where except for Brunei, a Muslim country, where most of the places in the world with the most severe penalties for gay behavior are in the Middle East, right? And so when I'm dealing with gay people, there is that leftover residual, whatever you want to call it, atavistic belief structures that they inherit from the generational trauma experienced by probably loving parents, but they experienced generational trauma from regimes that were very brutal and very anti-gay. And that still is with us, still to this day is with us. And that explains a lot of these issues with, how gay people perceive themselves. And so this is something that's really important to take this into context. And I do believe that we need to spend a lot more time when we're dealing with generational trauma, and people who are recovering from crippling beliefs that no longer serve them, which they received from the generationally traumatized parents, which is, I think to some extent, maybe to a large extent, not their fault. Again, we are not trying to assign blame. We're not trying to see who's the victim here. We're not trying to nail and judge the perpetrator. Um, I don't know where that gets us, right? It can get us to a place of an eye for an eye and revenge. And if the old saying, when you know dig a hole, for somebody, that you're going to knock off due to revenge, you better dig two holes because you're killing yourself as well. When we say, well, it was all my fault anyways, right? We go down a rabbit hole of self-loathing, self-hatred, and we commit ourselves to a life where nothing is deserved, where what's the point? It's a slow form of suicide and isolation and loneliness and depression. When we want to, nail the perpetrator, of course, everybody wants to be able to do that. Um, Boy, oh boy, we're going to have to get a really long list of perpetrators. Uh, that was my dilemma with my father for a long time, right? And there's just no point in that, because that's the equivalent of taking poison and hoping the other person dies, right? When we're dealing with monsters, especially if they're dead, we need to let them go, because there's no point in that, because the monsters just hurt us. And do you know what is one of my favorite aphorisms is, what we fear we become, what we hate we become. And so the fear and hatred is only going to deepen that sense of rage, anger, isolation, and lashing out. And that doesn't get us anywhere either. And so what is required is developing that sense of pity for people who have seen terrible things, right? And we have only a few countries in the world where in the last maybe 30 or 40 years, when you think about it, that have been quite peaceful. And I would also include the United States in the list of countries that have been war torn, because probably in the last 20 years since the war on terror, 1 million people have come back from areas all over the world who are messed up with PTSD, right? And we're seeing a lot of this devastate families, right? The soldiers that come back are victims of war, and they're the ones who are now in their 20s and 30s. And I've worked with so many of these when I did my clinical work at UCLA with the Veterans Administration. They were only starting to come back from Iraq and Afghanistan and other places in the world through the Veterans Administration that was right next to the UCLA campus. And this is where you had a lot of rage, anger, PTSD, and drug addiction, especially with heroin. And so, they nicknamed this Generation Kill. And so this is also the effect of war. It's not just civilians who are affected by war in Africa right now, in the Middle East right now, in Ukraine right now. It is also the soldiers who fight and who are now civilians and who have very difficult times, understanding their role in the world. And so So I really want to lay it out there that we owe it to ourselves to begin thinking a lot more loudly about how we can develop pity for our oppressors who are generationally traumatized by warfare. And we're seeing a lot of this happening all over again in the world with as Cold War II gets underway in the last 4 to 5 years, and we have seen so much of that happening in Indochina, in South America, Central America, Africa, and all parts of the Near East and Middle East. And again, we just don't talk about this enough, right? And in my home, it was never discussed. For decades, we never discussed it. And yet there's so much legacy that I still feel about the inability to deal with this as a child of war veterans. And so EMDR is a beautiful way to be able to reorientate these beliefs. It is a beautiful way to develop a sense of pity for the oppressor, to shift these beliefs in how we understand ourselves. And I think, a powerful way out of these compulsive behaviors that are a result of escaping reality, to check out from reality, in order to check out from the past reality, because my past is unacceptable, my present is unacceptable, so I'm going to go for booze, drugs, porn, sex, social media, shopping online, gambling. These are all the ways that I want to check out because the reality in front of me, or my past reality, is unacceptable. EMDR cuts through that. It allows us to get a calm understanding of the past with a physical and an emotional connection in order to reevaluate belief systems, and we can quickly shift and create different beliefs. I promise you, it's astounding what I've seen in order to move forward and to have a sense of, what's in front of me is now acceptable. What's in front of me now offers me peace of mind. What's in front of me is a situation that I can handle, that I can control. What is in front of me is a situation where I don't feel rage anymore, where I don't feel anger, where I don't want to repress my feelings, where I don't constantly feel like a victim, where I don't feel like everything is unfair. And I've seen this over and over and over again, and it is a beautiful mechanism for reorientating our sense of beliefs about what happened, as we can move forward into a world where, going forward with a sense of equanimity, detachment, and peace of mind allows us to have a much, much greater sense, a much greater potential, much greater opportunities for success. That is absolutely commonsensical. And so that's it. So that's it for today. And I would love it to give you a copy of my audiobook. Just leave a message, just leave a quick message online. You don't have to go to my website, but the website gives details of how the EMDR works and where I am. And it can be done, live or online. And yeah, happy day. And I'm really happy to give you a copy of my audiobook on EMDR and also an audiobook on William James and this powerful sense of how pity for the oppressor is really one of the ultimate goals of a spiritual experience. And, William James's book, Father of Modern Psychology, Harvard professor for 30 years, basically said that, one of the ultimate, highest points of a spiritual experience in all these religions that he examined in a 500-page book, all these religions over 5,000 years, that is one of the ultimate goals, is to get that detachment, to get that self-forgetfulness, to get that sense of completion, of detachment, and of agency by seeking out and achieving pity for the oppressor. So happy day, and leave a note if you like.